speak like that.
Great. She has a wonderful voice. She says it means I'm an African American that is not a slave. Okay? And that's exactly what a free woman of color is. Yes. Where would I have lived? Would I have lived in the North or would I have lived in the South? I'm not a slave. Oh, okay. Hold on. I cut you off. Okay. If I'm a slave, I live in the South. But if I'm not a slave, meaning free, I lived in the North. Okay? All right? Anybody else have an opinion? Where I would have lived. Okay. All right. Well, those are two good explanations. I was a free woman of color. I'm African descent. And I live in the South. I live in the South. And I'm not the only one that lives in the South that was free before Mr. Lincoln, before the Civil War. I'm not the only one. There were others. Is there anybody that has any idea how many free people of African descent lived in the South before Abraham Lincoln and before the Civil War? No, okay. She says over 800,000. Okay. Anybody else in the South before the Civil War? Less than 100. Less than 100. Anybody else? Well, those are two wonderfully extreme answers. And I know why they are extreme. Less than 100, more than 800,000. Far in. The reason we don't know is nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about it. So I would be shocked if you knew. They don't talk about it in history. I used to sell textbooks to college professors. And I went to a college professor at Vanderbilt University. And he taught American history. And I looked at that professor and I said, weren't there some free black folks that lived in the South before the Civil War? And that college professor at Vanderbilt University told me, yeah, there were a few, but they weren't that many. They weren't significant. They were so few. That's what a college professor at Vanderbilt University told me. So he would have been a lot more like you. No more than 100. I mean, that's not significant. But when I started doing research and I started looking it up, I found that 250,000 people of African descent free living in the South before Mr. Lincoln. Now, most of you, I think, are from the South. If you are here, you certainly have an interest in Southern culture. You think 250,000 people is an insignificant number? No. Remember, this is our culture we're talking about. Your culture and my culture. And you don't know that 250,000 people that lived here with your ancestors were free folks of African descent. That's a lot for you not to know about the culture that you love and respect. I wonder why. I think it has to do with who wrote the textbooks after the war was over. Whoever wins gets to make up the new rules. Whoever wins the war gets to tell the history of the war. So that's the reason you only think there's 100 and you think there was 800,000. 250,000. Not quite 800,000, but far, far more than 100. And that's the reason I tell the story. Because you see, when I reenact as my 4th great grandmother. And she was one of that $250,000. She was one of those, quote, insignificant people. Well, I got news for you. Since she was my grandmother, and she lived with my granddaddy, she was pretty significant to me. Okay? So, when I tell the history of the Civil War, I tell the history of why I think Abraham Lincoln was a fool and why I think it's important for us to know about our Confederate ancestors. And this is why I say he's a fool. How many of you have ever heard of Frederick Douglass? Okay. Frederick Douglass was a brilliant person. And he was outspoken and he wanted rights for people of African descent. He and another group of people like him were invited by Mr. Lincoln to the White House. No other president had ever done that. And you have to give him credit for that. Because you know what? Even a blind squirrel gets a nut sometime. So, you know, we give him credit. He at least did that and he got that right. They were excited about it. No president had done that before. And he was courteous when he came, when he invited them. And he invited them into the White House. He set them at the table and they were excited because they knew he wanted to hear what they had to say. Well, he was courteous. He did sit them at the table, but it turned out he didn't want to hear what they had to say. He had something to say to them. And this is what he told them. I'm going to paraphrase. It means I'm going to shorten it up, but this is what he said in essence. He looked at Mr. Douglass, and you got to remember, Mr. Douglass looked a lot like me. Okay? He looked at Mr. Douglass and he said, Mr. Douglass and esteemed associates of Mr. Douglass, you are remarkable men. You have accomplished so much as a people in this country. And I respect you for that. But let me explain something to you, Mr. Douglass. In this country, we are never going to give you your rights. We are never going to treat you as equal with white people. And so what you need to do, Mr. Douglass, is sell your property, get on a boat, and go to Canada. Go to South America. Go to the islands. Go back to Africa. I don't care where you go as long as you get out of this country. That's what Mr. Lincoln told him. Now, I don't know about you. He would tell me the same thing because remember, I'm a free woman of color. And Mr. Lincoln just didn't like free folks of color. He felt like that if you were a free person of color and you owned land, you were owning land that should have belonged to white men. White men were the only folks that needed to own land in this country. That's what Mr. Lincoln felt. So he'd have told me and my husband, sell your land and get out of America because you're taking up stuff from white folks. That's what he believed. Have you ever heard of the American Colonization Society? It was a society that was going to gather up all the free people of African descent, put them on a boat and ship them out of America. That's what he felt. Now, sometimes you have to put the shoe on the other foot. That means look at it from my perspective. Think of it. Let's say you go home tonight and I show up on your doorstep and I knock on your door and I said, bring your mama and your daddy out here and all your sisters and brothers. Now get this. I just don't like the way you look. So what you need to do is tomorrow, sell your land, we're going to come in with a ticket for you and we're going to put you on a boat and send you back, send you out of this country because I don't like the way you look. What would you think of me?
Think you're rude.
Rude?
Not nice.
Not nice? Some kind of crazy lady? Huh? Psychopath? So, fool ain't too much of a session, is it? Okay? All right? My husband says, you aren't too far off. Lincoln was all those things. Okay? But, one thing for sure, whether he was a psychopath or not, we can agree that if you would want to be shipped back to wherever your ancestors came from, why should I want to be shipped back? Why would I support a man who did not want me to live in this country? So, when the war came, all of my support went to the Confederate States of America. Because let me tell you about your Confederate ancestors. They didn't believe like Mr. Lincoln. They did not believe that I needed to get out of the country. I bought land right here in the South. They did not believe that people of African descent shouldn't own businesses. We owned businesses right here in the South. They did not believe that we should not get wealthy. And if we wanted to educate our children, those Confederate ancestors that fought for this flag, they fought for the right for us all to do that. That's why anything that I grow on my farm that I don't need goes to the Confederate boys in gray. And if a Yankee comes across my property, he better be hiding good. And that's why I think Mr. Lincoln is a fool. You think I'm a fool?
No, ma'am.
You think I am? Why so?
Because the Confederacy also believes that
Good point. I love it when somebody speaks up and says something. Huh? Yeah, the Confederacy owned slaves. But did you know that Mr. Lincoln's held slaves too?
he was the president and all of the presidents had slaves.
Uh-huh. And there were 4 slave-owning states. So it was okay for the North to have slaves, but bad for the South.
I don't think it was like that's how they did it, and Nixon didn't believe that he was slaves, but like the president had that slaves.
The president had to have, in other words, Mary Todd. You're talking about Mary Todd's family. Okay.
Why do you think the president had to have slaves?
I don't think that he should have the Americans
Okay, because they worked in the White House, maybe?
I don't know. I
Okay.
don't think it was right, but
Okay, so in other words, you're saying that I should have supported Mr. Lincoln even though he was okay with slavery. But let me put it to you this way. Mr. Lincoln did not allow. He made sure before he became president, he made sure that the people that were in the state where he came from, he made sure they had laws in place that said no people that looked like me could come into that state. And if they came into that state, they couldn't buy any land. And if they came into that state, they had to leave within 30 days. If they didn't leave within 30 days, they put them in jail. They had to keep going. Now, that's Mr. Lincoln's state. But in Tennessee, I can own land. I pay my taxes. I can go to the market and sell my products. I can live next to my white neighbors with no problems. So why would I support Mr. Lincoln, who will not even let me come to his state? Illinois.
there was free people in Illinois now, and the Confederacy had no slaves from the Union.
In Illinois, If there were any, they were grandfathered in. It meant that they had been there before the law was made. And there was a very, very few. And he made sure that no more could come. And anybody else that came needed to move out. In Tennessee, in Georgia, all of the free people that were there, they didn't have to leave. You are a thinking young woman, and I need you to keep thinking and asking questions, because these are good questions, and these are the conversations that we need to be having in our homes. If we want to address our country and it be successful, and we learn to live together as one people, these are the conversations we need to have. And they need to be open. And they need to be so that we can learn in depth what it means to be free in America and what it took. But I want you to know that from my point, because I'm not trying to, you don't have to think that Mr. Lincoln is a fool. I'm not trying to convince you that he is and that you need to think that way. I just want you to know why I think he's a fool, so that you understand that my ancestors fought for the Confederacy. And I am proud of them. And I don't want anybody to forget them. Okay? Thank you. You've been wonderful.